What is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. I am driving home on my way home from work. I had the most boringest day that I've ever had. I'm honestly grateful that I watched the McMahon documentary yesterday, and I stayed up way too late because I don't think I would have been worth doing any physical labor today at work. But I had to sit down at my desk and watch pretty much a 9-hour video on food safety. We have to do it every 5 years. I've been in this business for 23 years, I believe. I haven't killed anybody yet, and I'm not looking forward to it. So it was good to get up on the refresher. I guess now I have to go and take a test soon, and hopefully I retain all of the knowledge from today. But last night was a night. I knew that it was going to be a big one. I knew that it was 6 hours of footage. I did not really take in my idea. I kind of came up with it on the way home from work, where basically I said that I was going to watch McMahon documentary, and instead of waiting all the way until the end, I would kind of make a video throughout the night at the end of every episode talking about the talk points of it. I didn't have like scratch paper. I don't know if I have any actual lined paper in my house anymore. And my kids, they basically at school, they do everything off of laptops. So all I had was like random junk mail / bills that I need to pay sitting next to me on the table, and I kind of would scratch things down. And I think almost every episode I filled up the back of an envelope of talking points to talk about. So the McMahon documentary overall, I think was very good. I think that the things that I'm most worried about are what the average people who watch Netflix that aren't really wrestling fans, or maybe they haven't been wrestling fans in a long time. I was kind of nervous about them finding the Mr. McMahon doc and seeing all the negative things about it. When it comes to a wrestling fan who doesn't really want to talk about the negative news that is going on around Vince McMahon, I will tell you this much: they talked about some topics that they really have never gone into detail about, like the Ring Boys of the 80s with Pat Patterson and the other agent with the last name Garvin that was not Ronnie Garvin. He's the one Garvin that I know from his time in the NWA, as well as when he came to WWF and he did the gimmick where he stopped wrestling and became a referee, only to start wrestling again. He had a feud against Greg the Hammer Valentine that kind of really never went anywhere. I never, still to this day, when I watch those old shows, I don't know what's going on with that. But like I said, it's not even the Garvin that I'm talking about, so I don't know where we're going into it. But all of the sexual allegation things were pretty much the end of the documentary. I think for the most part, a casual viewer would have to sit through 5.5 hours of WWF / Vince McMahon talk in order to get to it. I don't think the most common Netflix viewer is going to be watching this. Now, no matter how good I think this documentary is, it's not the Tiger King. It's not going to be a documentary series that grabs you in and you're like, what the fuck is going on next? I can remember when I sat down to watch the Tiger King, episode 1 is kind of like a long drawn out episode of Dateline, and I was kind of falling asleep, and then all of a sudden episode 2 starts and a tiger bites the fucking arm off somebody who works at the ranch. I remember just going to work the next day. I'm pretty sure it woke me up for a minute, but I wasn't able to finish episode 2. But I went to work the next day, and I'm like telling people, like, started watching this Tiger King thing. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I've never seen anything like it. And I guarantee you, when I go home tonight, it's going to be the first thing I do, and I'm not going to bed until I finish it. But I don't think the McMahon doc is going to be able to do it. For a lifelong wrestling fan like myself who wants to go down memory lane about putting together the first WrestleMania, as well as building up stars like Hulk Hogan, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Monday Night Wars is brought up, with Hulk Hogan going to WCW and the start of the NWO. There's some topics that you're probably going to wish that they would have gone into more. I was really surprised when you think about the history of the WWF. I know it is a documentary on Vince McMahon, but there's not one mention of Randy Savage by name. I'm sure if you watch the video clips, he's shown somewhere. Actually, I know he was, because when they're, Bob Costas is giving his definition of what professional wrestling is and why, he liked watching it. When they talk about the hero and the villain and the damsel in distress, they show WrestleMania 5 when they're making their entrances to the ring, and they actually show clips of the match. And I think they show Hogan going over during the Mega Powers Explode. But, they don't talk about, Randy Savage. There's no mention of the Ultimate Warrior. When they're talking about the steroids trial, I know they're trying to focus on the fact that it came out that a WWF doctor that was, sort of pointed in their direction from the state wrestling committee, started working and supplying wrestlers with steroids, and they were trying to point the finger that Vince McMahon was telling them that they had to take steroids, and I think they even got to the point where they said Vince was supplying them himself because he had a large amount for personal use on him. I don't understand why they wouldn't have brought the Ultimate Warrior up. Ultimate Warrior in 1991 at SummerSlam, he was fired over money, but then he was brought back to the company as trying to be like a saving grace because Hulk Hogan was leaving the company after WrestleMania 8, which was a topic that was discussed. They brought Warrior back to sort of be like, this is our main guy, because I think they hadn't put the reins on, Bret the Hitman Hart yet. That would be later in the year. But then, Shawn Michaels wasn't Shawn Michaels yet. He still was in the mid-card. And I think he was still developing himself to the point where Vince would actually put trust in him to carry a bigger load in the company. They really needed a main event guy. They thought that Sid was going to come into the company and be the big baby face, and he just wanted to play the heel. He wanted no part of being the good guy. So they brought Warrior back, and that ended up being a short run. Because of the steroid deal, they ended up, firing him. They bring him back, only to fire him again because they figure out that, he's no longer doing steroids. He's doing HGH. That this is in 92 when they have to let the Bulldog go, who was the Intercontinental Champion at the time. They ended up putting the title on to Shawn Michaels, which was his first run with the belt. It ended up being on a Saturday night's main event. And then they blew up, in order to fire the Warrior, they blew up their own pay-per-view. The main event match was supposed to be Warrior and Savage going up against Flair and Razor Ramon. He ends up being replaced by Mr. Perfect, which was a big name in the WWF, and he hadn't wrestled in a while. He'd been the manager of Ric Flair for probably the last year plus, but Mr. Perfect is not the Ultimate Warrior. And then all of a sudden they're coming out publicly saying that they fired the Warrior, and it was just weird. It was the kind of like the first time that Vince was putting everybody's business out on the street. Normally, like when the Warrior disappeared after SummerSlam 1991, I'll tell you the truth, as a kid, I was watching the show, And I never really noticed that the Ultimate Warrior wasn't around until they made a big deal of him running out at WrestleMania 8, which is all of a sudden one day he was there, and the next day he wasn't being featured. So I just really didn't find a way to miss him. It wasn't like they were shoving pictures and merchandise in front of us, and you were kind of like, well, they're trying to sell this t-shirt and this poster, where the hell is he? It was just the way that Vince kind of did things. If you were there, they were going to book you, and then if you weren't there, they were going to act like you never existed. The point where they had guys, working for the company, like the Texas Tornado, who they wouldn't mention by Kerry Von Erich. They had the Dragon, but they wouldn't mention as Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, even though he had wrestled there before. They were trying to act like they were being recreated as these new characters, even though they were just wearing a costume and just going out there and wrestling the way they always did. I really enjoyed it. I think it would have been if the bad things never came out about him, but I honestly just wish that none of the things ever happened, to the point where Vince could be looked at as he is a mortal god of wrestling, that they could do no wrong. He had the XFL, he had the WWF Casino, he had the Times Square restaurant, the WWE The World, which that never really made any sense to me anyways. It just should have been like the WWE restaurant, and I think it would have done a lot better. But I thought it was awesome. It would have been a really good story. I was able to watch a few minutes of the interview with Shoemaker talking to Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons was one of the producers for this. And they basically just said, like, how did this start? And Vince just called Bill Simmons and said that he was ready to do an interview. He wanted to do a documentary. Simmons said that there was no way they would be able to do a puff piece on him and just sort of like do the highs and lows, a lot like the McMahon documentary was in the early 2000s. I think they came out in like 2006. That they would have to do it. And Vince just clearly said, like, I'll talk about it all. You ask me, I'll give you an answer. And that kind of ended up being the egg that exploded at Oliver's face. That I think that if he never did the documentary, they would never be released now. I think that somebody might do their own McMahon, but I mean, not being able to be a part of WWE, not being able to use the footage. I mean, they did the documentary on Vice, and I don't really think that got the footing of Dark Side of the Ring. I really didn't hear about anybody talking about it throughout it. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure that it was good. It just didn't get put out there. This being on Netflix is going to put it in front of a lot of people that don't watch wrestling, haven't watched wrestling in a long time. Maybe they know who Vince McMahon is. Maybe they hear the things about him on the news, and they're hoping that they're going to jump right into all the bad allegations right off the gate, like it's a one of these Puff Daddy pieces or something like that, where they're also in the news for a lot of bad things. But I'll tell you this much. For as thorough as the documentary was, the last episode, I think because they had to add about the last half hour covering all of the sex allegations and things like that. The part about Chris Benoit and CTE was very, very short in my mind. Maybe they knew that bad things were coming and they didn't want to harp on this other bad stuff to maybe put an exclamation point on the ending of the documentary. But Vince makes it pretty clear that he never had any plans of retiring. It didn't matter if, Hunter, it didn't matter if, for this, we're talking about the real life deal. So we're not going to talk about Hunter. We're talking about Paul. Didn't matter if Stephanie, didn't matter if Shane wanted him to step aside and let them run the company. He figured that he bought the company from his father. He had built it up to the point where it is today, and he's going to make the decisions whether they're good, bad, or ugly, because that's just the way that he thinks it is to be. I remember that Monday Night Raw that I went to around Christmas. I believe it was in 2018, where they came out in the ring and they said, hey, we've been making a lot of bad decisions. We haven't been listening to the fans. We're going to start listening to you, and we're going to start making this show better. And I understand they were taping the next week because of the fact that it was going to be airing the week of Christmas. But you would think that they would come in, that New Year's show, and they would, they had said they were going to elevate a lot of people up out of NXT to shake it up and make it a little bit different. They didn't do anything different. They didn't do anything different the next month, the next 6 months, the next year. We really didn't get anything different until Vince left the company, and Triple H and Stephanie were promoted. And then we were starting to get a new look of a Monday Night Raw and a new feel of WWE. And then just all of a sudden, Vince shows up again and says, hey, I'm back on the board. I'm going to be working for WWE. I'm putting myself in charge of the creative, and the show just went right back in the toilet again. I think that was when AEW was really starting to gain some momentum. They had brought in some free agents, and it was once Vince was sort of removed from power that they got their footing again, and they were able to start having shows to knock it out of the park. And that's kind of what we expect from WWE. And I think from here on out, WWE is only going to grow, and it's going to be bigger from this TKO deal with UFC. I hope that maybe UFC learned from Spike and Bellator with TNA. I'm hoping that if they choose to mix wrestling with UFC, that it is kind of like a short-term come together. I don't think we need the UFC guys showing up in the ring. I definitely don't think we need WWE guys showing up in the octagon. To just kind of leave them together. You can use some branding, like we've seen UFC guys around the ring in the stands. We had the guy who called somebody out for a match, and we've seen the WWE guys around the octagon at the UFC. I think that's worked, but wrong street. But we'll have to see what the future brings. I would say, if anything, I know that TKO stock is up over 50% over the last year, and I really think that they're really going to just find ways to keep growing. I don't know if or when Stephanie is going to come back into the fold, but this Triple H era is just, he's got his finger on the pulse. It reminds me a lot of like when NXT, the black and gold era was going down, and it seemed like no matter how the shows were in WWE, well, on Raw and SmackDown and their pay-per-views, like the NXT weekly show as well as the takeovers were must-see. And it was like once they were elevating people and putting them up on the main roster, they were just like the old school Ring of Honor. They were just finding new talent, rolling them over, and just making new stars out of them. It was like they never really had a dead period where it wasn't working. So here's to much years of success coming out of this for WWE. I'm hoping that in 30 years, hopefully. No, because he's not 60, is he? Well, here, how about this? We'll just say it hypothetically. Here's to like in 30 years we get a damn good Paul Levesque documentary on Netflix, and it just says that basically WWE rules the world. Peace out.